He was a godsend to me because I know that I would not have made it without knowing him.
Eminem has never been shy about controversy, but there's one story he almost never tells. The night he lost the man who pushed him to become Slim Shady, the mentor, the best friend.
Proof. That's how Proof was to me.
And just when you think you know how that story ends, the truth takes an even darker turn, because this isn't just about loss. It's about how one moment on 8 Mile shattered a friendship, a group, and almost destroyed a legend. Tonight, Eminem finally opens up about the tragedy that changed everything. And before this is over, you'll hear the eerie predictions that still haunt fans to this day. Before there was a global superstar named Eminem, there was Marshall, a kid in Detroit who kept getting told he didn't belong in rap. Proof changed that. They met young, bonded over LL Cool J, and Proof did more than hype Marshall up. He literally walked him into the arena. He brought him to the hip-hop shop, where Detroit's battle scene tested your lungs, your pen, and your courage. That's where Marshall stopped being a punchline and started becoming a problem. 12 wasn't just a rap group, it was a brotherhood, with Proof at the center, horrorcore energy, rock-infused hooks, a chaotic, fearless edge that felt like Detroit in sound. It was Proof pushing, guiding, believing, especially when others didn't. He stood next to Eminem on and off the stage. He was best man at M's wedding. He appeared in 8 Mile as a living reminder that behind the myth of Slim Shady stood a man named Deshaun Holton. Eminem would later say it plainly. Without Proof's guidance and encouragement, there would have been a Marshall Mathers, but probably not an Eminem, and certainly never a Slim Shady. That wasn't just tribute, it was confession. Proof wasn't a supporting character in Marshall's story, he was a co-author. And that's why what happened next broke more than a heart. It broke a world. April 11, 2006. A Detroit after-hours spot known as the CCC Club. It wasn't just late, it was illegal to be open. Inside, a game of pool and a heated argument turned to chaos. According to police, shots were fired. Reports concluded that Keith Bender Jr. was hit in the head. Moments later, the bouncer on duty, Mario Etheridge, fired back. Proof was shot. In a frantic blur, friends carried him out. He was rushed toward help, but when they got there was no saving him. Proof was 32. The city shook. Eminem went quiet. What made that night even harder to process was the confusion that followed. Police said Proof fired first. Proof's lawyer pushed back hard, calling those claims premature and reckless, insisting the evidence would tell a different story when fully examined. Fans clung to character and history. Some believed it was self-defense. Others just refused to accept the official line. The debate never fully died. But there was another life lost too. Keith Bender Jr. didn't go home that night. And that's the part too many documentaries skip: the double tragedy. Two families forever changed. A city forced to look at its own reflection in a dark window and ask why the places we gather to celebrate the music so often become scenes we can't forget. And just when you think the shock ends there, it doesn't. When Proof was killed, the world wanted answers, but Eminem wasn't ready to give them. In those first days, he chose his words with a precision that showed both his grief and his fear of saying too much. His statement was brief, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. "You don't know where to begin when you lose somebody who's been such a big part of your life for so long," he admitted. "Proof and I were brothers. He pushed me to become who I am. Without Proof's guidance and encouragement, there would have been a Marshall Mathers, but probably not an Eminem, and certainly never a Slim Shady." It wasn't just empty sentiment. Proof had literally walked Eminem into the hip-hop shop battles that launched his career, vouched for him when Detroit doubted him, and stood as best man at his wedding. Eminem knew the world saw Slim Shady as invincible, but he wanted them to see the man behind that mask, the one who relied on his friend to survive the climb. That's why he begged fans not to focus on the violent headlines of April 11, 2006, but on Proof's character. Funny, smart, charming, the heart and ambassador of Detroit hip-hop. But once the cameras were off, there was another silence, a private one. Eminem retreated inward, struggling with depression and addiction, and that silence turned out to be even heavier, darker, and more dangerous than anything he could say out loud. When Eminem finally spoke years later about what really happened to him after Proof's death, the mask slipped. He admitted the loss didn't just hurt, it blindsided him, knocking the ground out from under his feet. Suddenly, the man who had built an empire on sharp lyrics and unshakable confidence was drowning in silence. He spiraled into depression, numbing himself with handfuls of pills that blurred time until days bled into months. In one haunting confession, he admitted he was high at Proof's funeral and hated himself for it. He said he felt like he had made the moment about him, not the man he came to bury. That kind of honesty doesn't win sympathy, it wins truth. The real terror wasn't just grief, it was emptiness. Eminem explained that the more he used, the more depressed he became. Every pill dragged him further down, until even his pen, his greatest weapon, went cold. The fire that once made him fearless on the mic seemed to vanish. Between 2006 and 2008, his presence in hip-hop nearly disappeared. Fans whispered, "Is Eminem finished?" For a moment, it looked like Slim Shady, the unstoppable voice of a generation, had finally gone silent. But even in the darkest years, one name kept slipping through the fog: Proof. Whether in scattered interviews, reluctant memories, or lines tucked inside songs, Eminem always circled back to the same truth. Proof wasn't just a bandmate or a best friend, he was the anchor. The one who kept Eminem steady when fame came crashing in, when money and expectations threatened to bury him. And once that anchor was gone, everything drifted. For Eminem, losing Proof wasn't just losing a friend, it was losing gravity. And in that weightlessness, he nearly lost himself. The tragedy didn't just change Eminem, it changed to 12. You could hear it in the quiet. Without Proof, the group's chemistry couldn't be forced back together. Eminem slowly stepped away. He appeared on only a couple of D12 records after 2006, and when he finally faced it head-on years later on Stepping Stone, he closed the book. He didn't slam it. He set it down gently but firmly. He admitted what fans had suspected. The dream had faded, and the lie of "we'll get back to it" was only hurting the people left holding on. The longer we live this lie, he rapped, the less is left for closure. It wasn't goodbye to the friendships, but it was the end of the group as it once was. D12 continued as a trio, still getting on stages, still honoring the legacy. But the Myth fans carried Eminem and Proof side by side, trading energy back and forth like electricity. That Myth was gone. A living thing had lost its heartbeat. And here's where the story flips again from tragedy to something that unsettles even people who don't believe in signs. 2 years before Proof's death, Eminem released Like Toy Soldiers. The video shows a close friend played by Proof getting shot, rushed to the hospital, doctors battling to bring him back. The scene felt like metaphor then, a warning about how rap beef and violence leave carnage while the industry cheers for the mess. But after April 11, 2006, it stopped being metaphor, it became a mirror. Even Stranger Proof himself dropped a lyric in 2005 on No T, Lose, that fans still quote today. Brokenhearted, my soul's like an open target, and I'm ready to leave Earth. You step to my death next year on my t-shirt. It's not a prophecy, it's a bar. But when life imitates art this closely, people stop calling it coincidence and start saying the word fate with a whisper. And then there's the broader picture. Writers and commentators who looked at Proof's death didn't just see a rap tragedy, they saw an American tragedy. Another young black man lost to the gun. Another headline that would be buried by morning radio jokes and late-night talk shows. For every famous death we remember, there are hundreds of names most of us never hear. That doesn't make a legend's loss smaller. It makes the silence around the others louder. When you strip away the fame, the plaques, the headlines, what's left is painfully simple. 2 kids from Detroit met, bonded over hip-hop, and built a dream big enough to touch the world. But only one of them lived to see how far it would go. Proof's story ended in 2006, and Eminem's nearly ended with it. He admitted that for years he couldn't even bring himself to speak Proof's name without breaking down. Think about that. The man celebrated as the sharpest lyricist alive, the one who could dismantle opponents in seconds, was left speechless when it came to his best friend. That silence tells you everything. Proof wasn't just part of Eminem's story. He was the part that made the rest possible. That's why his public tributes hit differently. When Eminem said he can never, ever be replaced, it wasn't just eulogy, it was a warning. A glimpse into what happens when the one person who keeps you human, who keeps you balanced, suddenly disappears. Proof wasn't just the hype man or the group's glue, he was the compass. Without him, Eminem drifted into depression, addiction, and a near-fatal overdose. The industry loves the comeback narrative. It loves the idea of the fallen hero who rises again. But the real story here is darker and more honest. Grief doesn't clock out. You don't beat it like an opponent in a rap battle. At best, you learn to carry it, to live with it, without letting it choke the life out of you. For Eminem, that's been the human cost of losing Proof. Eminem made it clear. He didn't want the world to keep replaying the violent way Proof's life ended. He wanted people to remember the way Proof actually lived. Proof wasn't just another name on a tragic headline. He was the life of Detroit hip-hop. Funny, razor-sharp, and endlessly charismatic, he could light up a room with humor and then silence it with a verse. To Eminem, he wasn't just a best friend. He was the heart of a city that was often underestimated, mocked, or copied, but rarely respected the way it deserved. Proof carried Detroit on his back long before the world was paying attention. He wasn't satisfied with being talented himself, he demanded greatness from everyone around him. He created opportunities where none existed, opening doors in battle circuits and studios that would have stayed locked for a generation of Detroit MCs. He was more than a performer. He was a mentor, a builder, and an ambassador. And that influence is written all over the 12. Their energy, the comedy, the darkness, the chaos wasn't random. It was a reflection of Proof's creative vision. He knew how to spark chemistry in a group and make it work like alchemy. That's why when Eminem says there would never have been a Slim Shady without Proof, it's not exaggeration, it's fact. The entire persona, the courage to unleash that alter ego, the lyrical monster that shook the industry, it was all forged in the fires of a friendship that can never be replaced. Hip-hop has always carried the weight of loss. From Tupac and Biggie in the 90s, to Nipsey Hussle in 2019, to Pop Smoke just a year later, the list of names taken too soon is heartbreakingly long. Each death leaves a scar on the culture, but Proof's story feels different not because his life mattered more, but because of how clearly we can see the hole he left behind. Unlike some tragedies where fans are left with speculation and fragments, Proof's absence is visible in real time. You can hear it in Eminem's music, where his name is still woven into verses years later. You can see it in the 12 performances that feel incomplete without his chaotic, grounding presence. And you can even watch it in a video filmed 2 years before his death, like Toy Soldiers, where Eminem stages a scene that mirrors the very night he would lose his best friend. That's what makes this story so haunting. When people say life imitated art, it usually sounds poetic, but here, it feels darker, like art tried to warn us, to flash a signal, and we still had to watch the nightmare come true. Proof's loss wasn't just another hip-hop tragedy. It was a wound the culture saw forming before it ever bled. When the news first broke, the headlines wasted no time in shaping a narrative. Proof was painted as the aggressor, the hot-headed rapper who pulled the trigger first. Police reports seemed to support that version, and for a news cycle hungry for villains, the label stuck quickly. But Proof's lawyer, David Gorosh, pushed back hard. He called the statements reckless, insisting that investigators were rushing to judgment before the full facts had even been laid out. He argued that there were ways to determine exactly what shots were fired and by whom. And until then, stamping Proof as the cause was unfair. For fans and loved ones, this tug-of-war between official reports and legal defense only made the pain worse. Instead of mourning a man who had been the lifeblood of Detroit hip-hop, they were asked to consume him as a headline, a controversy, a cautionary tale. The spotlight lingered on the chaos of his final moments rather than the decades of influence that came before. That's why Eminem's words resonated so deeply. He said people were focusing on how Proof died, when they should be remembering how he lived. And that single line, echoed over and over in tributes and interviews, isn't spin, it's survival. It's the act of choosing memory over spectacle. Because in the end, scandals fade, narratives shift. But the story that matters, the story of Proof as brother, mentor, and ambassador, remains the only one worth replaying. The industry didn't stage a big press conference. There wasn't a red carpet moment where everyone decided what to say. Instead, there was a subtle, quiet recalibration. People who were close to Eminem gave him space. 12 kept performing as a trio years later, opening for Snoop, celebrating the legacy, but they did it with the gravity of people who knew they were performing inside a memory. The name D12 still means something, but the feeling people fell in love with the way Em and Proof bounced energy like mirrors that belonged to a time that ended in 2006. Fans never stopped talking about that line from Em, "Without Proof, never a Slim Shady." They repeat it the way people repeat scripture because it explains what they felt without knowing why. They also never stopped arguing the facts. Who shot first? Was it self-defense? Did the media get it wrong? Those debates are as intense as ever, but buried beneath them is a quieter consensus. Proof is still loved. Proof is still missed. Proof is still Detroit. Here's something the headlines rarely spell out. Grief doesn't just change a person, it changes the art they create. After 2006, Eminem's music was never the same. You could hear it in the pauses between bars, in the way his voice sometimes cracked under the weight of words, in the shift from playful chaos to something darker and heavier. Songs that once thrived on shock value and absurd humor began to carry undertones of loss, anger, and guilt. Listen closely, and you'll catch it. Tracks where the adrenaline feels like rage barely contained. Punchlines sharp enough to cut glass, delivered with a cadence that snaps shut like a trap, but beneath that precision is exhaustion. There's a shadow lurking in every verse, an echo of someone missing. Once you recognize that absence, you can't unhear it. Proof isn't just referenced by name in later songs, his absence becomes a ghostly presence, shaping the tone of entire albums. That's the part casual listeners miss. The cost of Slim Shady's brilliance wasn't just late nights in the studio or battles with censors. It was a friendship that built him up, only for tragedy to take it away. Proof helped forge the confidence, the alter ego, the lyrical monster that changed rap forever, but he never got to see the full future he made possible. For Eminem, every verse after 2006 carries that hidden weight. The beats may hit, the rhymes may dazzle, but the shadow of Proof is always there, beneath the surface. Two moments in hip-hop history became eerie mirrors of Proof's fate. In 2004, Eminem released Like Toy Soldiers, a video where Proof plays the role of a close friend gunned down, rushed to the hospital, and pronounced dead. At the time, it was meant as metaphor, a warning about beef, and the toll violence takes on the culture. But 2 years later, life replayed the same nightmare in reality. Then came Proof's own lyric in 2005 on No T Lose, where he rapped about seeing his own death on a t-shirt the following year. Fans still debate whether it was foreshadowing, coincidence, or just the grim poetry of someone living in a violent environment. But what it really shows is how close danger always was. Proof wasn't cursing himself, he was documenting the temperature of life in Detroit. And here's where it gets darker. When hip-hop warns about violence, the warning often circles back to the artists themselves. The stories aren't just entertainment, they're lived realities. Proof's death proved that even those issuing the warnings can't always escape the cycle. And that's not even the most jaw-dropping part. Because when you ask what comes next, you realize there isn't a neat ending. There's just life after. The tributes, the verses written with a ghost in mind, the interviews where voices break, and the silence left behind when words can't carry the weight. Here's the truth. There's no twist ending, no secret redemption arc waiting to be revealed. There's only legacy. Proof's legacy in Eminem's world is permanent, etched into public statements, stitched into lyrics, and even tattooed onto skin. He shows up in songs not as a casual reference, but as a guiding presence, a reminder that the Slim Shady myth was built on a friendship that can never be replaced. But Proof's impact extends beyond Eminem. In Detroit, his influence is even bigger. He mentored young rappers, anchored live shows, and gave out confidence like free mixtapes to kids who might never have touched a mic otherwise. For many, he was the bridge between raw talent and real opportunity, the ambassador who made the city feel seen. When Eminem speaks about Proof now, it carries a different weight. The pain hasn't disappeared, but it's shifted into something like peace, not because the wound healed, but because he's learned to carry it. Still, one question lingers. If Proof had lived, what songs would exist that we'll never hear? What 12 projects might have snapped the culture awake again? Those answers will never come. Grief leaves only the echo. Without Proof's guidance, Eminem said, there would have been a Marshall Mathers, but probably not an Eminem, and certainly never a Slim Shady. Sit with that. It's not just humility. It's the blueprint. The myth of the lone genius dies right there. Greatness is a collaboration, and sometimes one half of the duo doesn't get to take a bow. This story isn't about a scandal that ends with a courtroom twist. It's about brotherhood, loss, and the price of survival. Proof didn't just help build an artist. He helped build a world, a sound, a persona, a gravitational field around Detroit hip-hop. And on April 11, 2006, that world cracked. Eminem finally opening up isn't a marketing beat. It's a milestone in grief. Proof remains the ambassador of a city, the anchor of a group, the heartbeat behind a superstar. The headlines can keep arguing about the order of the shots. We'll remember the order of the love. And just when you think you've reached the end of the story, the truth loops back to where it started. A kid in Detroit being told he doesn't belong. Another kid says, "Come with me." And together they change the world. What do you think? Was Eminem right to close the book on D12 with Stepping Stone? Do the eerie Like Toy Soldiers visuals and Proof's No T Lose lyrics feel like coincidence or warning? Drop your thoughts. Tell us how you remember Proof, not the headlines, but the person, because that's the story Eminem once told.